Ryan and Tom, two best friends, had long dreamed of a road trip through abandoned suburbs and forests. The journey promised to be exciting: old towns, solitary diners, deserted roads, and beautiful scenery. However, this time, they chose Route 49, known for its bad reputation. Locals avoided it because of constant strange events and accidents, but the guys laughed off the warnings, treating them as just spooky tales. As evening approached, they finally got onto the infamous road. Fog was rolling in fast, and as darkness fell, the two decided to keep going. The sky was covered with heavy clouds, almost blocking out all light, making everything around them seem like endless, thick darkness. Soon, their only guide was the headlights on the empty road. "Feels like we've been driving for hours, and there's still no sign of a town," Tom said, feeling a bit uneasy. "Don't worry, Tom," Ryan tried to reassure him, though he sounded unsure himself. "We'll hit a diner or something soon, grab a bite, and check the map." Another hour passed, then another. They saw no cars, no signs, nothing. They realized they were stuck on this deserted road, and they were running out of gas. Around them, a thick wall of fog closed in, and the air felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on them. "Maybe we should turn around," Tom suggested. But at that moment, the headlights caught the figure of someone standing on the road. Ryan slammed on the brakes, and the car screeched to a halt. A tall, thin man was standing right in front of them, head bowed. He wore ragged, dusty clothes, as if he was from another time. He was still, standing in the beam of the headlights, not reacting to the stopped car. "Excuse me, do you know where the nearest town is?" Ryan called out, lowering the window, though he felt a chill of inexplicable fear. The man slowly lifted his head. His face was deathly pale, and his eyes glowed faintly, as though drained of all life. He squinted slightly, whispering so quietly they could barely hear. "You're stuck here too, but there's no way out." Ryan and Tom exchanged glances, confused and frightened, but before they could say a word, the strange man vanished into the thick fog, as if he'd never been there. "Did you see that?" Tom whispered, not believing his own eyes. "I think so. Let's get out of here while we can," Ryan stammered, his voice shaking. Ryan started the car and tried to turn around, but something went wrong. The engine made strange noises, then suddenly died. The headlights went out, plunging them into total darkness. The silence around them was so complete it felt like the world had disappeared. "Try again," Tom pleaded, feeling panic rising. Ryan turned the key again, but only heard a dull click in response. Suddenly, footsteps sounded close behind them, slow and measured, getting closer to the car. "Whoever it is, they're still out there," Tom whispered, glancing in the rearview mirror, but he couldn't see anything in the darkness. The footsteps came right up to the car and stopped. Silence returned, but they sensed someone standing just outside the window. A knock on the glass made them both jump. Slowly turning their heads, they saw the pale face of the same man, staring at them with lifeless eyes. "You can't leave," he whispered, barely moving his lips. Tom screamed and instinctively tried to open the door to run, but it wouldn't budge, as if someone was holding it shut from the outside. The knocking started again, now from the other side, and then another knock, and another, surrounding them with the sound of dirty fingers tapping on the glass. Panic took hold of both of them. Ryan, losing control, pounded on the steering wheel, trying desperately to start the car. Suddenly, as if in answer to his pleas, the engine roared to life and the headlights flicked on, illuminating the empty road. The figures had disappeared, as if they'd never been there. "Drive!" Tom shouted, and Ryan hit the gas. They sped down the highway, not looking back, focused only on escaping this nightmare. But soon, the road began to twist and stretch oddly, and the trees seemed to close in. Then they noticed a familiar sight. They were back where they started, at the same spot on the road. "How is this possible?" "We drove straight," Tom shouted, feeling ice-cold fear spreading through his veins. Suddenly behind them, the faint silhouette of a man appeared again, slowly approaching. His face twisted into a dark grin, as if he knew they wouldn't escape. "You're trapped," whispered his voice, echoing closer and closer in their minds. Realizing they were in an inescapable trap, Ryan and Tom tried again to flee, only to find themselves back in the same place, where unseen shadows, fog, and the eerie stranger awaited them. And so, it went on through the night, their cries for help swallowed by the silent emptiness of the forest, while Route 49 led them deeper into an endless nightmare. The noise behind the wall. My name is Mike, and I never believed in paranormal phenomena. I was always amused by ghost stories, demons, and anything that fell beyond ordinary human understanding. But one day, I encountered something that turned my life upside down. It happened last fall, when I moved into a small, dilapidated house on the edge of a town where few people seemed to stick around. The house was old, yes, but the rent was ridiculously low. And since I had recently been laid off, I decided to save money on rent and live in solitude until I found a new place. All the previous tenants had left shortly after moving in, which made me think there was something wrong with the house. But I figured it was just superstition. It all started with a strange noise behind the wall. On the first night, when I had settled into the bedroom and lay down in bed, I heard some odd sound. It came from the wall against which my bed was placed. At first, I thought it was old pipes or rats, but the sound was different. It resembled a barely audible whisper, something like a human voice, only unclear and muffled, as if someone was trying to speak words but couldn't. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Besides, I was tired and jittery after moving in. So the next day, when I returned from work, I just forgot about it. But the noise repeated. Only this time, it was clearer. Listening closely, I realized that the sounds were coming not only from the bedroom, but also from other rooms. This started happening every night. As soon as I lay down to sleep, strange noises would start behind the wall, turning into a quiet, barely distinguishable whisper. Soon, I stopped sleeping, because at night, when I closed my eyes, I could hear something whispering words to me. Sometimes, it seemed there were pleas and entreaties in these sounds, and other times, a chilling, bone-freezing laugh. One night, unable to bear this horror any longer, I got up from bed, grabbed a flashlight, and walked along the wall from where the sound was coming. I wanted to check if there was a hole there, or maybe some mechanism creating the sound, but I found nothing. In utter desperation, I knocked on the wall, hoping. I don't know what I was hoping for, but instead of silence, I heard a distinct echo, as if something on the other side of the wall responded to me. My heart began to race, and that night I barely slept. The next day, I called the landlord and asked if there had been any complaints about strange noises before. He paused for a moment and then advised me to ignore it. He assured me that it was just an old building and the sounds were perfectly explainable, but there was something unsettling in his voice. It seemed like he knew more than he was letting on. That night, I lay down again with the thought that it was just my imagination, that I was simply too impressionable. I had almost fallen asleep when a noise made me jump up. It wasn't a whisper this time, but a knock. A knock that sounded like desperate pounding against the wall. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was as if someone on the other side of the wall was struggling, trying to break through. I didn't know what to do. Should I just run? But run where? I didn't have money for other housing, and making a fuss over sounds seemed foolish. A few more days passed, and I got used to the noise, or rather, I accepted it. The sounds were constant, but I began to ignore them. After all, it was just an old house. However, I soon started noticing something else. Things in the house began moving on their own. The new knives I'd just bought suddenly disappeared in the kitchen. The books on the shelf were turned upside down, although I knew I hadn't touched them. Everything reached a peak when, one night, I woke up with a feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes and saw a dark figure standing by the door. At first, I thought it was just a play of shadows, but then the figure took a step toward me. I was paralyzed with fear, unable even to scream. The figure approached close enough for me to make out its face. It was blurry, but eerily familiar. It was my own face, only distorted with fear and malice. The figure stood at the edge of the bed, and I felt an icy chill piercing me to the bone. Suddenly, the figure whispered, "Help me," in a voice that seemed both mine and foreign at the same time. I didn't understand what was happening, but the nightmares didn't end there. When I woke up in the morning, I was convinced it was just a dream, but there was a pair of wet footprints on the floor by my bed, and on the wall, I saw words written in something sticky and dark. "They are coming for you." I grabbed my phone and called the landlord, but his number didn't answer. I decided I couldn't stay there another second. I packed my things and ran out of the house. As soon as I left the property, I felt a strange sense of relief, but the unease still lingered. Later, I found out that the house I had lived in belonged to a family that had disappeared under mysterious circumstances many years ago. People say that no one could stay there for long since then. People heard strange noises, saw silhouettes, and everyone who tried to live in that house left in terror. Now, when I look back, I think that the whisper and strange figures were something real, something that tried to tell me about the terrible fate of those who had lived there before me. And sometimes, when I fall asleep, I dream that I'm once again walking down that empty hallway, with barely audible whispers behind the wall. "Help me." It was pouring rain, pounding on the roof as if trying to break in. The night was black, with no hint of light. The house was dark and quiet. My wife and kids had been asleep for a long time, and I was sitting in the living room, enjoying the silence, when I suddenly thought I heard something. A faint, barely perceptible knock at the front door. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just the rain. But the knock came again, louder this time, like someone was scratching at the wood outside. My heart froze. I carefully stood up and walked to the hallway, trying not to make a sound. I went to the window and looked out through the rain. 3 figures were standing on the doorstep, dark silhouettes, their faces hidden by the night. They stood motionless, staring straight at the house. And then one of them slowly raised a hand and began to trace their fingers along the glass. The movement was eerie, as if they wanted to make sure I had noticed them. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was black. The signal was gone, leaving us cut off from the outside world. In a panic, I went back to the bedroom, woke my wife, and told her to wake the kids. Whispering, almost silently, I explained that someone was outside. We decided to hide the children in the closet, covering them with blankets, while we returned to the hallway to try to figure out what to do next. But before we could come up with anything, a terrible scraping sound suddenly filled the room, like a knife sliding against the door. One of the intruders began slowly opening the door, having broken the lock with a horrifying, deafening silence. I held my breath, stepping back, but I knew we had no escape. When the door opened, the 3 stepped inside, 2 men and a woman with long, wet hair clinging to her face. Their eyes were dark, as black as the night outside. They silently looked around the living room, and one of them stepped toward me. I tried to say something, but my tongue wouldn't obey. As if cut off from reality, I just stood there, as if hypnotized. The woman with the long hair glided up the stairs leading to the 2nd floor. I realized they were planning to search the whole house, and, as if in a dream, I tried to block her path. But her hand, cold as ice, pushed me aside. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were focused on nothing, as if I didn't exist. When they started up the stairs, where the children were hidden, I snapped back to reality and, gathering my last bit of strength, screamed. My voice cut through the silence, and the intruders froze. For a moment, something dark and animalistic flickered in their eyes, and I realized that no negotiation would help us. My wife, hearing my scream, grabbed a heavy vase from the sideboard and threw it at one of the intruders. He staggered but immediately lunged at us. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a flashlight, and shined the light straight into his face. His eyes glinted like those of a predator, and he instantly stepped back, covering his face with his hands. The woman in their group hissed angrily, like a snake, and grabbed the man's arm, pulling him back. At that moment, a siren sounded from outside. The alarm had gone off. Without saying a word, the intruders turned and disappeared into the darkness. vanishing into the night. We were left in silence, trembling and holding our children, who had come out of hiding when everything quieted down. That night, we stayed in the house, barely breathing, listening to every sound. Only at dawn did we dare to look outside, but there were no traces of our nighttime visitors. Since then, the kids can't sleep without a light on, and I still feel like I hear faint rustling outside the door at night when the rain beats against the windows.